Mark Murphy is the CEO and president. And here's what he said in talking about his team's quarterback.
Ted Thompson, I think most of you know, just a great general manager, passed away this past year. Earlier this year. Often talked about Aaron, that he's and it wasn't just Aaron, and a lot of different players, he would say, he's a complicated fella. So I'll just say that.
I mean, I'm cringing here. You have one job. You legitimately have one job. You don't have any control.
Turn down the temperature.
Exactly. You have no control over the football operations at all, right? You're not Brian Gutekunst. You're not Matt LaFleur. You are completely removed. All you have to do is keep things as peaceful as you possibly can at this point in time. And you even said it to yourself publicly. And then you do exactly what you said you weren't going to do. And you tried to stop it. He tried to stop it in that moment right there. But, I mean, what century are you from where you feel like that's not going to come around and bite you in the tuchus? That is a just dumb move by Mark Murphy, who tried to pull out of that nosedive, Danny. You can hear it. It's not just, it's a bunch of players. It's not just one player, but Aaron Rodgers is a complicated fella. Just what are you doing? How does this get you any victories? Oh, a couple of cheap laughs in this audience that you have in front of you?
Why do teams do this? Because Mark Murphy's not alone, and some teams are good at avoiding it. The Seahawks avoided this earlier with Russell Wilson, but I'll think back to 2002 with Gary Payton, the Seattle Supersonics, and the owner, Howard Schultz, essentially picked a fight with him. Like, made a very public fight over the fact that the Sonics weren't going to extend his contract. Gary was upset. Howard talked about it in public. Gary didn't show up for media day. He didn't even miss a practice. It was just the putting on the uniform, taking pictures, and answering questions. And Howard trotted out to mid-court at their practice facility and talked about how the franchise was insulted, how the franchise was disrespected. He picked a fight. Why do teams do this? It seems like the dumbest possible thing that you can do. Like, why do teams think that you can either embarrass or humiliate your best employee, a guy that you need to be playing his best for you? Why do they think that that's a wise move?
Because they don't know that they're doing it when they do it, right? It has to be just complete incompetence and absent-mindedness.
Do they not listen to PR people? Like, there has to be a PR person like saying, this is a colossally bad idea for you to do. Or are those people just, hey, there's tons of rich people that only surround themselves with like, oh, yeah, I think that would be a good time for you to make a stand. Because if you're the PR person before Mark Murphy gets up there, what you say is, whatever you do, don't say anything that can be construed as criticism of Aaron Rodgers.
Should a PR person even have to say those things? Isn't it common sense? I mean, you're essentially walking a toddler by the hand if you feel like before every press conference you have to say, okay, Mark, don't take a flamethrower out and set fire to this entire operation by saying anything about Aaron Rodgers.
Rich and powerful people in this country are used to being immune from any consequence. They're used to being able to say anything they want, and because they control the jobs, because they control the paychecks, that they don't have to worry about whose feelings they hurt. And this is one of the very rare instances with a franchise quarterback in which that franchise quarterback and whether or not he shows up to play has a lot more bearing on the outcome of this season than anything that the president might say. So maybe they're just not used to having that. Howard Schultz's feelings had a lot less to do with how that 2002-2003 season went than whether or not Gary Payton felt that the team liked him or was wanting to trade him. And maybe rich people are just too immune from that, or thinking that whatever I say goes, that when they actually get into a stare down, they'll win the long-term stare down. The team will almost always win it, but there can certainly be short-term cost to that.
When you're in your own bubble, I imagine that you talk about players in a specific term or way that maybe just you don't realize comes across as belittling, and maybe that's what Kevin Mather did too, as a texter says. Is he
that's
Mathering?
A good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Mather is saying that to people. He didn't know he was being recorded, but that was a public statement as well, right? Like, I mean, granted, he thought it was a Zoom call with the Bellevue Rotary Breakfast Club. He thought he was talking to 20 people, and it ended up being transmitted. But that's true. You saw, if there was anything that was most sort of galling about that, it was the way he talked about the players, right? The way he talked about them as kind of being a product, and honestly, the way he characterized what I charge for parking and the sort of the overall way he talked about his team as if it was his and he was running it. Whereas, like, yeah, okay, that was probably the most appalling.
I think they're used to talking that way, and they assume that because they are talking to fans of a team, that the fans are going to see things from their perspective as well, as if the players are essentially commodities and aren't necessarily, you know, people that are going to hear these things and potentially be turned off by what they say. So, I mean, I think it's just a general cluelessness that you would think with all the examples that we have had, specifically here with Kevin Mather, but in other situations as well, that maybe ownerships would start to get a little bit wiser to the things that they're saying publicly and change the tone just a little bit.
Or just to realize that you can shut your trap. You actually don't have to say anything, right? Like, this was a situation where saying nothing would have been eminently better than what ended up coming out of his yapper.
Mm-hmm. And instead, here's what he does. And I guess if there was any chance of a peace being made, this is going to set things back to square one, to set things back to where they were right before the start of the NFL draft when Aaron Rodgers decided to leak out all of those stories about how he's not happy with the Packers.
Do we give Pete some credit for the way he handles this? He's dealt with a lot of turbulence in 11 years, and you've never heard him. If anybody can find or think of an example in which he's really undermined a player publicly or demeaned him or said anything like that, none are coming to my mind. There's guys he won't talk about. Like Lendale White, when they let him go after 35 days, he basically just said he's going to have to go and find out what he's doing somewhere else. Like, but he didn't say anything about his commitment. He didn't explain why it happened. He just made it clear that it wasn't going to work here.